Turbines and information networks, what do they have in common? In a world where IT networks and industrial control networks and probably everything else all becoming interconnected, we need to rethink how we approach cybersecurity. Nadav, Zafrir, CEO of Team8, will be speaking about our connected and controlled world and how we continue to make the same security mistakes all over again, which ultimately prohibit innovation. Please welcome Nadav back to the stage.
All right, guys, so we've got 10 minutes from now to dinner, so bear with me. What I wanted to tell you at the beginning is that I've been doing this for about over 2 decades, this cybersecurity research, back when it wasn't as sexy as it is right now, if you haven't noticed yet. We keep on finding new holes and then some new ones. It's an iterative process, and sometimes it's overwhelming, and most of the people in the room know what I'm talking about. But honestly, I want to talk to you about some bigger problems that I see in the near future that are just around the corner, which I think we don't have the luxury of overlooking. So when you think about cybersecurity, basically you're thinking about information security, right? You're thinking data, data access, anomaly detection, fraud, advanced persistent threat, ransomware. It's all about data and information security, and again, you know what I'm talking about. And again, sometimes it's so complicated and almost overwhelming that we can overlook the next revolutions that are coming, and I think we are on the verge of a new revolution, and it will reach way beyond IT. So Lisa spoke about the connected cars. That's one of the things that we're going to be seeing. And these new challenges are not about IT, they're about machine-to-machine networks. And these machine-to-machine networks are now converging into our spaghetti IT systems, and it should concern all of us. If you want, maybe we can call it the convergence of everything. So let's take a step back. So behind me is a picture of a turbine. These machines in varying forms have been around us for about 150 years, and I'm guessing most of you are not really concerned or lose sleep over at night when you think about turbines, but I do. These are operational technologies, or what we call OT. This is the OT world. It's machines controlling machines. They use telemetry, they collect data, sometimes thousands of times every second, and make adjustments, and that's what keeps these systems relatively safe and seamless. Problem is that they use protocols that were designed in the 70s to the 90s in a pre-connected world. And so encryption, authentication, ultra connectivity, interoperability was not an issue back then. However, their security strategy, which is basically isolation, doesn't work anymore. But now, your industry is starting to change. And obviously not because you own a turbine, but because the current industrial revolution, or what we call Industry 4.0, is changing everything. So again, think about things that are wired and intelligent. IoT, connected cars, Asaf's artificial intelligence, conversing bots. In order to operate efficiently, they require connectivity. And interoperability in those instances is paramount. Now, this is the future of your business. Whether you know it or not, it's going to be more horizontally integrated, and it's basically converging the physical to the virtual. Now, 4 minutes before dinner. I know it's a lot to take in this afternoon, and it's been a long day, but I want to leave you with a couple of takeaways. So 3 takeaways before we head for some drinks and dinner. And I am aware that you don't own turbines, and that some of you, or most of you, are not concerned about smart grids and smart networks, but this is around the corner. So let's start with this. So you don't own a turbine, but in fact, I'll bet you in your existing business right now, you do have machine-to-machine networks, for example, your data center. And so your data center is the heart of your IT infrastructure. And I don't know how many of you are concerned about the chillers that cool down your data center. But the chillers are machine-to-machine networks, and the problem is that they're no longer air-gapped. Now, it doesn't matter if it's by design or because this is the inevitable trend, but they're no longer isolated. Now, in contrast to your IT, where you're overwhelmed with data and vendors and so on and so forth, here in the machine-to-machine networks, lack of data is what you should be worried about. And so you can't really see what's going on in your networks because you can't really speak the languages and the protocols from the 70s and the 90s. And if you can't see it, how can you protect it? And that's the first thing I want you to look at. Look, the good news is, and we don't have the time to go into it, but it's possible to get the visibility you need. Actually, in some of the research that we've been doing in Team8, and one of our portfolio companies, we've been able to look at even the most esoteric protocols of the largest vendors in the automation industry and to actually speak these languages. And once you speak the languages, you can create the visibility. And we won't go into that, but we can talk about it offline. But what I do urge you to do is, if you haven't done it already, look at the chillers in your data center, look at your elevators, look at your building automation, whatever business you're in. And matter of fact, if you're an IT or a CISO in an organization, start speaking to the engineers in the organizations. I know you think they speak a different language, but we're looking into a future where these two languages are going to be morphing together and creating a new reality. And so you have to start talking to them for obvious reasons. So that's the first point I want you to take away. Second, and Vicky spoke about this extensively, and I loved your talk. The question is, how is the future going to look? So, look, naturally, we've been focusing on information technology, and we've been basically concerned with human-machine communication. You know, we've been able to do amazing things with it, and it's great, except that it's a lot about the user. It's a lot about the human user. You know, we monitor user behavior. We invent new ways to understand and profile the person behind the keyboard. Anomaly detection is one example. We're making sure that it's a human behind the machine that we're talking to, and CAPTCHA is just one example. But now go back and think about the wonderful world of machine-to-machine networks, connected cars, IoT, drones, and so on and so forth. Think about Amy, Asaf's friend from the Valley. How do you do two-factor authentication to her? Or how do you work with Microsoft Cortana or Siri and do CAPTCHA and figure out that it's not a robot at the other side, where we're looking into a world where we will want robots to do some of the work for us, including on the IT networks. And so if you think that the world is moving from OT to IT, and if you think these machine-to-machine networks are going to recreate themselves and become more like the IT networks, think again. It might even be the other way around. The information technology might look more like the OT environment because the man or the human is moving out of the picture and not as centric as they used to be. And it's going to control most of the things that we're going to be doing. And so when you're thinking about optimizing your cyber posture in your business, I'm not saying don't do two-factor authentication. What I'm saying is consider what that means in a machine-to-machine centric world where the human becomes trivialized from the process. And I know I'm saying something that's almost the opposite, but this is around the corner. Now, this is San Francisco in the turn of the last century. This is what transition from one era to another looks like when different technologies, some very mature and some very nascent, are using exactly the same infrastructure. It's a mess. You see intertwining worlds on the same infrastructure, some mature, some nascent. The question is, when you think about machine-to-machine networks and IoT, I don't believe that the pace and the magnitude of the fourth industrial revolution will be as sympathetic to this mess as the haphazard architecture that doesn't design interoperability and security to begin with. And so if my first two takeaways for everyone is take a look at your critical infrastructure, and the second is look at the human. He's not going to be there forever. Third thing we got to look at is how do we look into the future and create interoperability by design. Now, I think one good example is GSM. It was designed in the late 80s, beginning of the 90s in the European Union, or what later became the European Union. And these folks really thought it out. When they thought about global standard for mobile, they took security and interoperability. And now we can move between 200 countries without even thinking about, with our phone, relatively secure. It's not perfect, but it works. And it keeps on getting better in every iteration. And that's the sort of thinking that we should be putting into machine-to-machine networks in the future in order not to be in the mess that we saw in the San Francisco streets. So lastly, start talking to your engineers. Start looking at your elevators, your chillers, your air conditionings, your fire alarms. They're a part of your system and they're no longer isolated. Second, yes, humans are extremely important, but as we move forward, they are going to become less centric. And then in the near future, and this has been talked about in other speakers, including the Baroness, we will have to start thinking about interoperability, about standardization, about protocols that make sense, so that we don't get that mess, and so that eventually, when you think about the fourth industrial revolution, we can actually materialize the vast, incredible, real opportunities that we have there. And cyber, at the end of the day, fortunately or unfortunately, and all of us in cybersecurity, we're just enablers. We have to make this happen. We have to help make this happen. I want to thank you again and call Iran to wrap this up. Again, thanks a lot, and looking forward to speaking to you over dinner.